All right, hello. We are here today with Josh Williams, who is now just a designer. And you might be familiar with his past work, Gowalla, Blink Sail, and Firewheel Design, among other things. How are you doing today, Josh?
Doing great. Good morning.
All
Thanks for
right.
having
Yeah, of course. Of course. No, I'm excited about this. So I guess give us a brief overview of how you got into web, how you started, and the wild journey you've been on to get to where you are now. In 30
me.
seconds or less.
In 30 seconds left.
Take as long as you need.
Yeah, no. So I actually, I started volunteering at our church when I was a teen as a graphic designer, doing like an afternoon a week, just working on odd projects. And so that was like when I was 13 or 14, and my mom kind of had a graphic design background, and so I was doing it was Illustrator, freehand, PageMaker, and just doing traditional graphic design work. And then long about 95, 96, I had a friend who was hiring me to do some odd jobs and was like, hey, you should learn to code, and this graphic design stuff is all going to be, on the internet at some point. And he pushed me pretty hard on that. And it turns out, he was, ended up being right. So that was kind of what pushed me to take the stuff that I was doing for print design and start doing it on the web and in digital. Of course, I loved icon design. I had like a hobby habit of replacing the trash can icons on Mac OS 7 and all that sort of stuff. I nearly got fired for system resource editing at one of my jobs. So you learn things that are fun but kind of nefarious at a low level. And hobby turned out to be kind of a job. And it turns out that iconography and that there was a couple companies doing that at the time in the mid late 90s, like Icon Factory, and they started throwing some extra work my way, and hired a couple friends. Next thing you know, you've got a small agency doing iconography and user interface design work for software, and that's what ultimately became my first studio, Firewheel, and everything kind of else came out of that. So that was my background, just graphic designer, and then ended up in the web world, and then ultimately mobile from there.
And it's like, I think that's one of the things that I absolutely love about having watched Firewheel over the years is you look at how everything got chained together, and Gowalla even came out of that icon design work. Like,
That's right.
so much of what you did. Blink Sail, I guess, was obviously very heavy on design, and I'm sure you've got some stories about the lime green that would be great to talk about. But can you talk, I guess, kind of about the transition from how you got into a product and then how you kind of gravitated back and got into what eventually became Gowalla, and kind of the path to Gowalla through all the icons and everything else?
Yeah. So as Firewheel began to grow, this was the era of 37 Signals had just launched Basecamp, and there was kind of like these early Ruby on Rails apps that no one had really. I mean, this is Web 2.0. If people actually even remember that. And in the midst of that, as we were growing our own, services, we were a small organization, and I was increasingly doing more overhead work than actual design work. So the question was, how can I eliminate redundant tasks from my workflow? And one of those obviously was just the act of bookkeeping, invoicing, and the like. And inspired by others out there, thought, oh, hey, let's build a little invoicing service to streamline that process for us. Turns out it's a need that other people have as well, and there wasn't at the time a lot of great solutions for that. So Blink Sail was an outcome from our own studio of just building a service that we wanted to use ourselves. And it was designed, the first version designed and built in it was 4 or 5 months. We kind of conceived it in March or April and shipped it in July. And the first version was very much one of those, you put it out there and you invest kind of out of the profits of your business. At the time, we were still really a 3-person shop, and I'd hired a contract engineer, Scott Raymond, who ultimately became a co-founder with me at some of the later opportunities. And And so you're using your own profits to build this thing. There's a little bit of like, I don't know if this is going to work out. And initially, like, still didn't know and thought we sunk, at the time. Seems so small now, but at the time it was like, $30,000, $40,000 worth of effectively again company profits that you're putting into a project like this. And it wasn't until probably 9 or 10 months later when we shipped the second version of Blink Sail and then raised the prices, and that you started to feel like, okay, maybe there's a time in the future now where, we make that money back, where this becomes, a profitable endeavor. But it certainly wasn't the case of like, we shipped it and it was instant success. It was we shipped Blink Sail, and then it was still a lot more work. And I think now, like, we could have looked at it and said, okay, wow, we spent all that money, and now, we have this service that's bringing in maybe a couple $1,000s a month, and that doesn't really justify the upfront expense. But we pushed it through, and it was, work getting there. But I'm glad we did in retrospect. But it wasn't easy. And, it was a year later where finally it was like, okay, this might work out. And that was still, I think, very early in, again, kind of that software as a service days. As it started to grow, it was funny because I was maybe 25 at the time. And after the second version, I got actually a call from Sequoia Capital out in Silicon Valley. We were still in Dallas, and it was like, oh, have you ever thought about raising money for Blink Sail? Would you like to come out and talk to us? And I didn't know a thing about that world, and so I did. I got on a plane with an attorney friend of mine, and we went out and spent a day at Sequoia, and I wouldn't even say we pitched them on it because I didn't even know what a pitch was. It was more like, I'll show you what we built, and I remember we met with an investor named Roelof Botha, and Roelof is like kind of a superstar. I had no clue at the time who he was. And I remember Roelof asked, "Oh, well, do you think that there's a chance that you could grow Blink Sail into a $50 million a year business?" And I was just like, "What?" And honestly, I think it probably scared me off. It was that realization of, oh wow, this is the outcome that they expect if they're going to invest in a company like what I built here at Blink Sail. That was the farthest thing from my mind. A number like $50 million. The funny thing now is, fast forward 10 years, and I look at it with like hindsight and what I know about the industry and what I know about venture capital, and I think, oh man, like we totally could have done $50 million a year with that. I look at some of the companies that have actually grown and filled that space, and they're really profitable, successful companies there. And that was, in some ways, just a naivety of my part of like what could be there. Now that said, I still don't know that I would have wanted to do that. I think financial software is really hard. That's one of the reasons why I ultimately kind of moved away from it and chose to focus on other things. But certainly I think it speaks to like the validity of the idea at the time and what I still think is a valuable service today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really interesting in that too is Blink Sail. What was the timeline around that versus kind of starting to move into other apps and doing other things? And what was the sequence of events that led you to go? I mean, it sounds kind of like, okay, we don't want to be in financial, but what were the other things that led you away from Blink Sail ultimately to focus in other areas?
So we talked about a little bit, before I got on about, what was the transition like from, pure services company to a product company. And as Blink Sail grew, probably, as we reached, again, I think we launched in 2005. And I mentioned, it was well into 2006 before I started to see that maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And then another year passed, you get into 2007, and Scott, we'd hired full time at that point, to work on Blink Sail. We'd hired another engineer to work on it. We had a team building up, and it had grown into basically being half of our operations revenue. So half was coming in from Blink Sail, half was coming in from client work. And the thought for me was, are there other ways that we can, again, continue to invest in product, divest ourselves from having to do as much client work, and continue these flows. And so one of the other ideas that we had, again, kind of building for designer tools, was this thing called Icon Buffet, and it was kind of this crazy community for designers who wanted to swap stock icons. And for us, it was really just a marketing gimmick to, again, sell our stock services and market our products. And it turned out like that community like took off and had legs itself. Not ever, like, it made money, but not like significant amounts of money. But the community was super vibrant, and there were tens of thousands of people on there that were swapping icons, and it was just this weird thing at the time. And one of my clients at the same time was a fella. This is just one of our studio clients. Was a fellow named Sean Parker, and some people may know him as Justin Timberlake from The Social Network. And Sean, who is like nothing like what Justin Timberlake portrayed him to be, but still funny. Sean took a look at Icon Buffet and was like really intrigued with what we had built. And this was long about 2007 when Facebook had launched, Facebook platform. It was the first time they'd opened that up, to third-party developers. And Sean, I'm oversimplifying here, but basically said, you should take Icon Buffet and put it on Facebook platform, and just make it a game. Forget like any of the market your design studio stuff. Just take the basic mechanics of I'm trading and swapping pixels and put them in a social environment, and it's got to be a success. It turns out Sean was pretty prescient on that, and we ended up building this thing called Pack Rat, which was a social game that predated Farmville and all the Zynga games, but very much shared some similar mechanics to what we had built with Icon Buffet. You unlock these icon cards, they're varied in rarity, you swap them with your friends, and we built a business model around it. And again, it turned out to be, I'd say like a cottage, cult hit type success. Never the, bajillions of users that, Farmville was pulling down. But for a team at the time of 7, 10, 12 people, it was more than profitable. I mean, we did really well off of Pack Rat. And it was at that point that now we had Pack Rat that was legitimately doing like major revenue, and Blink Sale was still a thing. And I was kind of forced to this, like, I can't, quality was important to us. And so there was just a question, like, where do we want to invest our time? We couldn't do both. And so we kind of had to decide, like, where do we want to put our eggs? What basket we want to put them in? And so we made the decision to do that with Pack Rat because it was obviously growing, faster and had a larger revenue. And sadly, that was when like Blink Sale just wasn't getting the attention that it needed, and it still had plenty of customers, still profitable, still doing its thing, but we weren't getting to bug fixes as fast as we wanted to, or new features as fast as we wanted to. And it probably existed in that state for about 6 months or so before a fella, I don't know if you know Brandon Cotter, he's kind of part of the old Dallas, Dallas tech space, kind of came along and said, hey, you've got this thing. Do you have any interest in selling? Because there's the business there, and I put the time into it. And so I'd known Brandon for a while. I didn't seek him out on the thing, and it turned out to just be, I would say, like a decent situation in terms of finding somebody who wanted to put the effort in and put a team around it. And, for us, it was a way to move it to a home where it would get the attention that it needs while we were focused on something else. And so in a lot of ways, it was one of those decisions that seemed real natural and kind of made itself, at the time. There wasn't a lot of like serious thought. It was just this is the right move to make, both for us and both for, the Blink Cell product and community to have a dedicated team behind it that can give it the attention that it needs. Again, it's, I would say, a little bit bittersweet. And then I look back at it and it's like, having played the hand that was Pack Rat and Gowalla, and you see that, and you look back like, well, that other hand could have been like pretty good too. I think they were both viable businesses, and we chose to, move one on in its current state. It was, all in a successful endeavor for us, and I'm glad that we did it. It was a great opportunity to sell it off to Brandon at the time, and Double Wide Labs who continued the work. But yeah, it's your baby, and I look back on it at times and think, what would it have been like to have continued work on it? Because I do still think that the idea in the space is one that was good. But that's how, that was where we kind of parted ways with Blink Sale, and dove full time into Pack Rat. I think the outcome of Pack Rat and that experience of building it is we realized that we had built this community that basically had gamified sitting on your butt for 10 hours a day in front of Facebook. And we were looking to do like a game because we knew like, okay, Pack Rat's going to get this big and it'll go on, but what else can we do that, allows us to keep growing here? And at this point, it's 2008, 2009. Apple releases an iPhone that has a GPS in it, and it was kind of this crazy idea of, okay, let's take the same mechanics again, icons that can be found, discovered, traded, and put it into the real world. And instead of trading icons in front of your computer, we'll get you to go out and explore the real world and do this. And that was kind of the genesis of the idea behind Gowalla. Let's make icons for all the places, and you can go out and collect them. And it turned out that was it was popular too. Again, it was no super prescient foresight on that one. Just happened to strike a chord that I think a lot of people got into. That was again early days for iOS as well. So there was now there's so many things and so many interesting ideas. And back then it was still very greenfield and fresh. I look at, even from a timing standpoint though, and from an IP standpoint, the success, especially last summer, of like Pokemon Go, which had very similar characteristics to what we were doing with Gowalla, and actually shared a board member as well. So there's a little bit of shared DNA there. I think speaks to the fact that the idea was a good one. The timing and the technology has evolved a long way. So I think you still have these opportunities to build these big hits. I think the Pokemon IP, certainly helps a whole lot in terms of raising awareness.
Just a little.
Yeah, just a little. But I think that I'm really proud of what we built, with Gowalla, and it was, I think, special for the time that it existed. What do you want me to talk about from there?
No, this is good. I've got a slew of questions from all this. There's definitely no doubt that everything that y'all created was loved by the people that used it. Not just oh, this is a neat app, okay, but everybody, there was a really passionate group of users around everything you built. And so, I think that speaks to a lot. I think a lot of it, like you said, it's just the kind of market forces and timing can play such a role in how that all works. And I absolutely love how there just wasn't a master plan to any of that. It was because so many people, I feel set themselves up and they want to have that perfect idea that they can say, let's go all in on this idea. And they wait forever and ever before they actually commit to anything and really try it. And then nothing ever happens. Whereas, and it's not always going to work if you just go chase every idea that comes into your head, but the idea of pursuing these different channels and really pursuing them, not just dabbling in them, but saying, let's go do this. And one thing connects to another, and you can see the exact line. Even Blink Sale, I'm sure a lot of the technical experience you gained from that factored into Pack Rat and Gowalla. And it's interesting to see how just by doing things, one thing leads to another. You learn, you gain experience, you're pushing your boundaries, and you're taking it one level further every time. And obviously with no plan, you just were doing. And so I think that's a huge thing that people can learn from, to just go out and tinker and play and then commit to it and really kind of follow it through it to the end and see how it plays out. One of the, I'm not sure which of the two questions I want to go to first. I guess let's go ahead and continue this out. So Gowalla gets acquired by Facebook. How was that experience in terms of, here you are, you built this hugely popular thing, but just the way it was going and with Foursquare and all the other surrounding forces, like how did that play out and how did it feel kind of making that transition and going from being a founder to an employee again? Well, not again, for the first time probably for you, really, in a while.
Yeah, it was truly one of the first times for me, certainly in that capacity. It was certainly a difficult transition, for a couple of reasons. One, ultimately we ended up raising, just due to the attention of the space, we ended up raising, a little over $10 million for Gowalla over a couple of rounds, and had some just stellar investors and fantastic folks that we were working with there. And we raised that money. And at the time, again, Foursquare was raising money as well aggressively. And both companies were raising that money somewhat under the assumption that someone in this space was going to become the next Twitter, the next Facebook, that location sharing was going to become like a network in and of itself. And so the investment money that was coming into these companies was somewhat predicated on, Gowalla being a social network, on Foursquare being a social network. And ultimately that didn't play out, as designed for either company. And both have gone, obviously we sold to Facebook. Foursquare's changed their business model and has found a different path to sustainability at this point. But at the time, you understand that those were the pressures and that was the expected outcome. So when, again, Facebook ended up launching, a check-in feature. And when things start to look like more clear that, Facebook's going to gobble like the social side of this up, we've raised $10 million. At that point, there's one of those questions, how do you justify the outcome? We were, spending through that money. We didn't have, enough revenue coming in to justify like the overhead of the headcount that we had hired. Again, kind of on this expectation that we're going to go, exponentially up and to the right. And so you're forced to, reconcile do we go out and raise a bunch more money, to kind of fuel the fire.
Yep.
When now the space is starting to, cool a little bit. Or do you kind of get everybody out in so many ways? And it was really difficult because we were not in an advantageous, position, being number 2 player in the market, to raise money, and we needed to. It was one of those like we're going to be insolvent in a number, in 6 months, or we have to find an outcome. And fortunately, the outcome for us was Facebook. There was a number of other places we could have ended up. It could have ended up at Yahoo or something like that. And it's Yahoo, but like Facebook was a great place for us to land, and high quality people there, and we were able to land it in a way that like it wasn't too rough. I say that in the sense that like it was actually rough in a lot of ways, but it could have been like. It could have been disastrous, and it wasn't. Mm-hmm. The tough things for us, and it was, an era where like Facebook was growing. They were trying to acquire talented design teams. Our team fractured going through the acquisition process. A bunch of folks didn't continue on with Facebook, and that sucked. It sucked for us as a team to have to. Some of us go on and some of us, didn't. And I really hate the fact that we, ended up in that situation. I hate the fact that Gowalla doesn't exist as a product that we hadn't found. We did not find a way to, to make it sustainable, because I think there's something beautiful there. And the ideas are things that I'd love to re-explore. But when it's all said and done, it could have been much worse, and like everyone kind of got out with their shirt on. And so, and for some of us that meant, hey, we moved to California and we went to work at Facebook, and I ended up working on, location and events and pages and, a number of products there as a product manager. And it was a really, I think, great learning experience to be a larger company like that and see like what the process and the rigor was of an organization that when we joined had 3,000 people. When I left had, close to 7,000. And so it was pretty crazy, watching that happen and being a part of that. It was, I think for me, having run effectively my own startup for, at that time, probably 10 years, and then to go from like, hey, I've run a startup, which is a whip in and of itself, to now I've landed on like a really high velocity, large company. There's no, no rest for the weary on that one. And so it's just kind of jumping from one fire into another. But, an enjoyable experience and good people. It's it's one of those places that, at times I think I could have stayed there longer, but I was ready to kind of step out and, like I said, try some of those things again. I still believed a lot in what we were doing with Gowalla and felt like we, had not fully been able to explore some of the things that we wanted to. And so after some time there, that's when, made the decision to step back out and start Last Guide, which was, hired, co-founded with with Adam Michaela Supa, who had been at Gowalla and gone on with us. Keegan came over. Some other former Gowalla people were part of that, and we hired a really great team, really super talented team of former Apple, former Dropbox, former Facebook people. Kind of go back into the mobile location space again, and that was like Last Guide is a really interesting period for me in the sense that. I think like esoterically we had in our mind, like we kind of knew what we wanted to build. It certainly wasn't concrete by any means, but we had a lot of amazing people who wanted to come work for us. And we raised a small amount of money and it was enough to like, okay, well, let's hire these people and we'll figure it out, as we go. In retrospect, I would have kept the team small again, but it was like, oh man, these incredible people want to come work with us. How do you say no? And so we kind of grew that team up a little bit. We shipped a product called Goji that was kind of an experimental keyboard built on top of the platform that we ultimately wanted to build with Last Guide. It never saw the light of day. So the general gist was that in Gowalla, there's a feature called Trips that was very popular but never got the love that it wanted. And so we kind of wanted to re-explore that, like how do you make these self-contained guides, if you will, and serve them up in a contextualized way. So that if it was a, sunny Thursday afternoon, we could say, hey, here's a list of beer bars with patios that you could go hang out at right now and push those to people. And there's a lot of really cool ideas that we had. And again, we shipped Goji, which was kind of a preview of that. And then right in the middle of that, we were about, I guess, a year into Last Guide. My grandmother passed and my father, whose cancer had been in remission, his cancer came back and it just blew up my year. I ended up, having to, over the course of basically 6 months, be gone attending to family for 3 or 4 of those. Yeah. And it's just not a good mix for, venture-backed startup, Yeah. And so, frankly, I look back and it's like, I'm happy with the things that we've built. I've structured the pacing of the company a little bit different. And then sometimes just shit happens, and there's nothing you can do about that. And so
I'm vaguely familiar.
Yeah, no doubt, right? So it is what it is. And we kind of gave it some thought about, like, do we, reboot it, so to say? Do we try to put a little more fuel in the tank and jumpstart it again? And then at the time, I was just kind of exhausted. And I think, Supa and Keegan and some of the others, we all were, it was just, we had been part of the team. We'd been working at Gowalla together. We spent time at Facebook together. Now we're working on this. And it was just like, we needed a break.
Yep.
And I wasn't in a healthy place, you know.
Yeah.
So
No, I completely relate, and that is in a lot of ways very similar to kind of what I went through with Sifter and deciding, okay, I need a break from being a, it's a different scale, obviously, but it was all on me to carry everything, and it
yeah,
was definitely not something I was up for. So I completely relate. So in terms of bootstrap, what's that?
so you hit the big red button, stick them out, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there is too, like there's constantly, I mean, I don't think I've had any regret, but there's constantly a, I wonder, could I have let it falter for a few months, kind of
That's
regained
right.
my composure and gone at it again? Would that have been the right thing for customers? Would that have been, would I have been happy doing that? I don't know.
Yeah,
There's always going to be questions, but I feel like ultimately it was the right decision. And,
yeah.
that's kind of the most you can hope for.
Well, you're in a similar situation as me too, and I think our families are like similar stages. And you also reached that place too of like realizing, okay, when I was 25 and I didn't
Yeah.
have any kids and I had like a certain capacity and certain bandwidth, you can do this. Now all of a sudden you realize like, wow, the stress that I put upon myself also has these downstream effects,
Yep.
and you do have to ask yourself like, what's the trade off?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me it was just that realization of like, hey, there's a season for everything, and like this isn't that season,
Yeah.
and I need to take a step back.
Yeah. No, I know now working at Wildbed, I've even joked with Chris and Natalie, like at some point I'm not going to be able to fight the itch. Like I'm going to want to go try something again. I don't even know what yet or when, years from now, I'm sure. But yeah, it's one of those things that kind of, there's an ebb and a flow to it where, doing that, seeing the people that do that nonstop for decades, just, I don't know how they do it. I mean, they're
Yeah,
machines. One thing I definitely want to hit on is bootstrapping versus raising money. And we've kind of touched on it that raising money puts you in a whole other category of pressure and different
yeah.
expectations. In hindsight, having done a little bit of both and had, gone through that and had the outcomes you've had, what do you see as the pros and cons? And based on that, kind of what would you do differently in hindsight?
Let's see. I mean, some of the pros and cons I think are well trod paths. There's the obvious ones like, well, a con of bootstrapping is you remain in control. You're not giving up, equity to somebody else. You can grow at your own pace and kind of control your own outcomes. The cons to it, of course, is that you're limited to the speed at which you can grow. You may or may not see that as a con. There is it's just a lot of work. And again, you may or may not see that as a con, but it's the act of like bootstrapping Blink Sale and bootstrapping Icon Buffet and some of the early things that we did were it didn't happen overnight, and so you are having to you kind of do that on the edges, and you have to put in this extra time on top of the time that you're doing your services to pay the bills or doing your day job or whatever it happens to be. And so you have to realize that time's going to come from somewhere, and it's going to take that extra work. The flip side is, again, I think ultimately for me, being able to build something with your own hands and know, like, at the end of the day, this is mine. I think it's satisfying and fulfilling, to do that. I think if you have a business model where, where there's obvious money that's coming off the back, and it makes a lot more sense to bootstrap as long as you can, because, again, you kind of prove to yourself that this is valid. The, raising capital, I think there are certain things where, again, market timing is such that there's an obvious advantage to being able to move into a market quickly and establish yourself and like scale a product faster. And there are reasons to do that. I think for Gowalla at the time, what we were trying to do and how we were pitching it, I think raising money was the right thing to do at that time, like in that window. And, you know, the flip side is when you do that, the outcome expectations are different. And certainly with regard to like Silicon Valley style venture capital, these investors like want a legitimate outcome. And we're talking like not 10x, we're talking like 100x, 1000x, you know, like massive, massive outcomes, which mean like when you go and you raise money, you know, a few $1 million from one of these firms, you know, there's an expectation that these companies are going to, you know, have $100 million, $1 billion, you know, outcome. Not like I sold it for $10 million. Not like I raised $2 million and we sold it for 10 and that's a success. That's not the game that's being played. It's you know, I raised, you know, $2 million and then $10 million and then $20 million and then we sold this for, you know, a few billion. And that's a really aggressive game to play. And I think that there's a lot of companies right now that are being started that aren't coming into it with that mindset that it's like, oh, I'm going to raise money. But ultimately what I want is a lifestyle business outcome. I hate that term. Other people hate that term. But I think the outcomes are different. And so if, you know, I think there's a lot of companies that are raising money right now that shouldn't be. And, you know, the outcome will never justify, you know, what was raised to put in. And this is like actually one of my things now, with the you know, the gloss gone that like Gowalla is not going to become the next Facebook social network. The ideas that were there, I think, were interesting, and like some concepts are things that I would love to re-explore. But I have a really difficult time thinking about them in the context of re-exploring it as a venture-backed company. And I think there's a lot of things that I would try to re-explore under the guise of like, how can I bootstrap this again effectively myself? So what's difficult is that like there's nothing like exists really in between, and there have been a few outfits like NDVC and some others that kind of exist in this like seed structured financing that have an expectation of a different outcome. And I would love to see more of that, because one of the difficult things that does not exist right now, or is like much more difficult, is like the ability for like small businesses to go and get a loan. Like you can't, like look at my parents built this amazing landscape company in the Dallas area. And it was like, it was a traditional small business, you know, and employed, you know, 30 people, and lots of people went shopping there every weekend to buy plants and flowers and shrubs. And it was your typical American small business. It was a lot of hard work, but it was a success story at a certain scale. And they did that because they were able to get like, you know, a loan to build some greenhouses and to, you know, prove that they had this idea that they could get capital for and get back, you know, under, we'll say, reasonable terms. And like that's a really, you can't just go down to your bank now and get loans for that sort of stuff. And on the flip side, private investors, private market, I think is generally over-indexed toward venture capital. So I think there's a market for something that kind of exists in between, and people like NDVC are doing that. But there definitely needs to be more of like things that allow you to like, hey, I could use a little capital, but at the end of the day, like the intent is to pay this back, you know, with some interest, and you know, I still own my thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. There's middle ground on the spectrum right now that isn't. There's not a lot of coverage, right? It's bootstrap or go raise money and start that timer on yourself.
That's right.
But there's not a lot of middle ground that. Yeah, I love the ideas that NDVC is pursuing and talking about, and I know I'm excited to see kind of how that shakes out, and if it, you know, gets more people interested in kind of healthy returns instead of astronomical returns.
That's right. So I mean, that's where I think it's like, if you're in your mind, if you're that guy who hears the investor say, "Hey, can you grow this to $50 million a year?" and you're like, "Absolutely, I can." And like you have that confidence level of, you know, I get it. That's the outcome I'm going for. Then yeah, go raise that money, you know. But if in the back of your mind you're like, oh, I never actually thought about that. You know, I don't know if this business is actually even capable of achieving anything like that, then I think you have to question, like, why am I raising this money?
Yeah. No, very true. So we're kind of starting to get long, but there's a couple more things I want to hit on. So one, I guess, talk a little bit kind of about what your plans are now with designing, and are you just taking a step back after the roller coaster you've been on and catching your breath, and how's that going?
Yeah, so kind of after we dissolved Last Guide, and I just decided, hey, I still got kids. I got college education to pay for at some point for them. So I could just, but I didn't want to jump back into starting another company. Just couldn't. So I thought, well, hey, I love design work. I love working on early stage products. I love working on early stage brands. So I'll just do it for some other people. I'll go work with some friends and help them out in their companies, and kind of just go back into design consulting again. And I started doing that about a year and a half ago. Out of just again work on some interesting projects with some folks. And in the midst of that, my wife also decided that she wanted to jump back into school and go to culinary school, and so that precipitated us moving out of San Francisco up to Napa, where she's in culinary school up here right now. And for me, it was just a matter of like, well, hey, I can still continue doing, design consulting from wherever. So I go into the city, every other week or so, work with clients down there, and otherwise, work from the house here where I am right now. In the same way, I'm doing brand design work again. I'm doing some product design work. I work with one or two clients at a time, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy working on early stage stuff, and it's nice working on somebody else's problem where, like, at the end of the day, it's not like I'm not the one having to do the board reports.
It's their problem. Yeah.
It's their problem. But it's fun. It's fun to work with, again, I think small teams where, you can build something in that environment. I've spent a lot of time working over the last year on an email. I'll plug it. An email client called Astro that's like, kind of a mailbox style, native Mac and iOS, email client that, exists in, kind of our Slack era. So I've been working on that and then doing a couple of brand design projects. And at the same time, like, I'm back into how do I want to do my own products again, but I don't want to do a company right now. So what do I do? So I'll tell you my other little side thing, but over the holidays, I made this crazy calendar, and this goes back to, my love for iconography and the like. So kind of the same thing. So I thought, I'm going to do a calendar for some friends, and on all the holidays, I'm going to sub out the dates for like emoji and like replace, Christmas with the Christmas tree and Easter with a like chick coming out of the egg and so on. So I did this calendar. I'll show you. I'm leaning over here. I'll hold it up. It's like one of the early proofs. I call it the Unicalendar since it was like Unicode for all the Unicode characters. And if you can like see the little black ones are all the icons that are there. So I gave them to friends, and then it turned out that everyone started asking where they could buy them, and I never intended that. And so, cause I just took a short run of them. So now I'm like, okay, I've got to do this for real now. And so I'm gearing up to, like, along with the Unicalendar, some other stuff, like start producing my own products again. And we'll see, at the very least, sell some things on the side. And it's nice to work on some things that I'm interested in and I find fun. But,
we've seen where your creative endeavors kind of end up pulling you. So be careful that you're not at Sand Hill in a couple of weeks raising $50 million for your calendar business.
Yeah, I know. I trust me. I've been on the path enough times now. Hopefully, I cannot complain about my life one bit. At this point, I live in a really small town, and my kids go to school like a few blocks from where I live. It's pretty. My wife is, she's working an externship at a fairly like a Michelin star restaurant right now, tending their garden and working their grill. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go back to Sand Hill and do that. At this point, I'm pretty satisfied doing my design work and making my calendar, you know, for the time being.
It is really funny, the parallel. We're moving to a town of 3,000.
Yeah.
Our girls will be 2 blocks from school. They'll, you know, you walk everywhere type of place.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's what's appealing right now. Like,
Yeah.
slow down, stop the whole constantly feeling like you've got to do more and grow and grow and grow, and just take a step back and breathe. And it's been, and we're not there yet. The moving process is a pain, but theoretically it'll be good. So
yeah, it's healthy.
the one biggest question. So looking back at all this, and this may be kind of the same thing. It's kind of a 2-part question. What's, through this whole journey of yours, what's been the worst day, the roughest day, just to get through that day? How did you get through it? And then if it's different, if you could go back to the very beginning and tell yourself one thing and know that you'd actually listen to yourself to do differently, what would that be?
I think there's probably two days that stick out. One was the day that, you know, kind of had come to the realization that, you know, we were going to have to sell Gowalla to Facebook. And I say have to in the sense that, like, we were incapable of, like, continuing as an independent organization. And, you know, you come to that realization of, like, we're not going to be able to raise funding the way we want to. We're going to have to sell to some, these are going to be the best buyers. So, and you feel helpless, you know, that, especially knowing that, like, hey, all the people believe, like, users believed in you, employees believed in this vision. You're all building this thing together, and it's not going to work out. And there's an overwhelming sense of disappointment, both in yourself and the unknown of, like, what are we going to do now? It was horrible. I remember just, like, just the deepest pit, you know, having to. And it's weird because it's like, oh, you're selling to Facebook and everything, but at the same time, it wasn't what you were. And that's no fault of Facebook's at all. That's just, like, the nature of where we were. And then the second was in the middle of Last Guide. You know, when my dad's cancer came back, he actually ran away. He was kind of on a bad medicine trip and ran away from home in the middle of all that. And that was right when. We were at a critical point as well. I had to leave everything and, like, literally go find Dad. And there was that realization, same thing of, like, you have employees that wanted more out of this, and there's nothing you can do to change this outcome at this point. And, you know, it's like, what, are you not going to go find your dad? No, like, instead people are going to sit around, you know, wondering, like, what are they actually supposed to be working on for the next several weeks while, you know, you're sorting your life out. And in both cases, you know, now with hindsight, I think the thing, I don't know there's anything I could have changed about either situation, but I think time has a way of, like, when you're in the midst of those things, like, everything, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and, like, you're just done. And you know, in retrospect, you look back and there's a realization that you know, it's not the case. And for as horrible as those moments were in the midst of them, they were, you know, it sounds cliche, but, you know, a little bit character producing. And also ultimately it shines a little bit of a light on, like, what's, at least for me, like, what's most important in life, and kind of this realization that the relationships with my coworkers at Gowalla were ultimately, like, very important, and the relationship with my family, you know, has been very important over the last couple of years as I've dealt with some of this stuff. And in the midst of, you know, all the business dealings and decisions, you do kind of have to finally ask yourself, like, okay, at the end of the day, is it more important that we raise this money, or, you know, get this deal done, or you know, do I do right by people? And yeah, I'd like to think that I've done a decent job with that. Like, it's hard. You can't please everybody. And I know I look back, you know, situations with certain coworkers or even certain investors where you're like, I dropped the ball on that one and it sucks. And you kind of have to come to peace with, some of those things that not everything's going to be right, but there's ways that, time doesn't stop and there's more that can be done and you can, I think, continue building. And what's great is for me, I was on vacation last week and with my family in Hawaii, and just randomly bumped into a woman who was one of our earliest employees at Pack Rat and Gowalla, and she actually just turned out she's moved there. And it was so amazing. We hadn't seen each other in ages, but really fantastic to still have these relationships intact, even though that the adventure that you went on together has long since come to a close. And so I think keeping those connections, those relationships strong is really important, because ultimately none of these things you can build on your own. Even if you even if you own the whole thing and stuff, so to say, none of us are working in a vacuum, and keeping these relationships strong is really important.
It's interesting that it's almost always, whenever I ask people, it's so frequently times where people feel like they let people down, either their team or customers or whatever it is. It almost invariably comes back to that. In a lot of cases, it's raising funding and having to take pay cuts or to let people go or whatever it is. And it comes down to that. It's everybody's toughest days when they've got to tell people bad news or, buckle down and make something work that's, when you're in a bad situation. So it's interesting.
That's right.
So the last part of that then, if you could go back to, I guess, what would it be, about 2004, 2005-ish, and give yourself some advice to do something differently, what would it be?
To do something differently?
Doesn't have to be huge. Doesn't have to completely change the game.
I think that, for me, if I look at the part of my life that I hate to say suffer, but that's probably the best way to describe it, that suffered the most, so where I sacrificed the most, was probably family impact, especially when my first daughter was, an infant. My second daughter was born. We were, pretty high. We were raising money and it was high stakes, and, we thought it was high stakes, whatever reason. But it put a lot of stress on my family. I was traveling a lot, and there's a lot of things that you think, oh, this one thing is the thing that's really important. It's going to make a difference. And you look for a lot of, what are these big hits that are going to, they're all of a sudden going to be the thing that changes your trajectory, and chasing those, big hits, if you will, you can pull a lot of time from other things that are important. And I think that's the one thing where, again, bootstrapping in a certain way at least changes the pacing.
You still feel that way.
Still feel that way. That's right. But I think that's one of those things. Looking back, it's and I would tell myself, hey, don't chase these opportunities at the expense of people that you're going to be living your whole life with, and so I feel as much as I've had a reasonable number of successes and failures, there's not a lot I would change. I look at it, it's it's actually been a pretty interesting journey. I've learned a lot. And I feel, to the very least, I've worked on things that have stayed true to the sorts of things that I'm interested in, and I'm happy about that. And that part I feel I'm very pleased with. And if anything, you don't snip the crap on your own shoes too much. but otherwise, I feel it's been a good journey.
Right on. All right. Well, that is all I've got for you. We kind of ran a little long, but I think it was worth it.
It's been fun.
Thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure all the listeners will as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks.